Hi, my name is Dr. Vera Tarman, and I'm an addictions physician working out of Toronto, Canada. And today I want to talk about alcohol blackouts. By the way, a lot of benzodiazepines, which go to that same GABA receptor that alcohol go to, can apply here as well. But we're going to focus on alcohol blackouts. Now, what are they? Basically, alcohol blackouts are a form of brain impairment. It's not necessarily permanent. It might be if you continue to drink, because alcohol will lead to ultimately to brain damage and dementia, like that can happen. But if you have an alcohol blackout, it doesn't mean that your memory is destroyed, but you are impairing your brain. It is actually a sign of brain impairment. And when it happens, it's usually when you've had a few drinks, and your blood alcohol level, that's the amount of alcohol that's in the blood that the liver has not managed to clear yet, that is able to go to the brain and affect the brain. And a blood alcohol level of 0.15, now just to give context, an alcohol level of 0.08, which is the typical legal limit for driving in many countries, including Toronto, Canada, that's 0.08. 0.15 is just double that. And how do you get to a 0.08? Well, if you're a naive drinker and you haven't developed any tolerance, that might be after 2 drinks, 3 drinks if you drink them quickly. And so a 0.15 could be 3 or 4 drinks in an hour. You could have an alcohol blackout. Now, they typically happen at 0.20 or more, but can happen depending on your vulnerability. Types of blackouts. So there's a fragmentary blackout where you just don't remember a few things, like, did I really say that last night, or did that really happen? I don't remember that. So you remember more or less what's happened, but not everything. That's a brownout, essentially. That's what we call it. An episodic one where you just totally forget the whole episode, that's really classically what's called a blackout. And that's where you can actually have an accident and not remember the accident. You can wake up and go, I don't remember how I got here. This happens a lot with people, and it's very frightening for people. Or they've had a fight and they said terrible things and they don't remember. So the partner is going, you said all these terrible things to me, and they're going, no, I didn't. What are you talking about? That's an episodic blackout. That you can be fully functioning. The person is going, you said this, I know you meant it. And I mean, they saw that you were impaired, but you weren't passed out. You weren't acting except for being impaired, drunk. They still think that you're saying what you're saying, and they don't know that you're in a blackout, but you can be fully functional and in a blackout. How do you get in a blackout? Well, obviously the amount that you drink. So if you're drinking, like I said, 3 or 4 drinks and you're a naive drinker, you can put yourself at risk for being a blackout. If you've developed tolerance and you've been drinking for a fair amount of time, a number of years, it might take more drinks to get into a blackout. But so amount of alcohol matters. Then speed. If you're drinking quickly and you're not pacing yourself, you're not eating, you're just drinking alcohol very quickly, you're not letting the liver do its job to basically detoxify that alcohol. It can only work at the level of one ounce per hour. And so if you're drinking 3 or 4 or 5 ounces, that's a lot of alcohol that's swirling around in your blood and going off to your brain and causing this potential blackout. So speed is an important feature. Now, the other thing that seems to be important is that gender is a big issue. So women don't have as efficient livers as men. So men can often have 3 or 4 drinks that would be equivalent to a woman's 2 or 3 drinks. Women just simply can't drink as much unless they've developed a great deal of tolerance. Women are more likely to have a blackout at a lesser amount of alcohol, which is, of course, puts them at great risk. Also, genetic predisposition. It seems to be that some people get blackouts more quickly, more easily, sooner in their drinking history than somebody else. Some people never get blackouts, and that there must be some genetic predisposition. What is a blackout actually? So it's, like I said, it's brain impairment. And where is the brain impairment happening? It's happening in the hippocampus. I mean, alcohol affects the whole brain. Let's not fool ourselves. It's not just going to the hippocampus. It's going to the cerebellum, making me feel dizzy and I can't walk. It's going to the frontal lobe, so I lose my impulse control, limbic system, I get emotional, and the hippocampus, where it affects my short-term memory. So it goes right to the short-term memory. I like this diagram. It's a nice explanation of how we actually remember, by Atkinson and Schiffer in 1968. He describes it as, here's how we remember. And you'll see where alcohol actually causes blackouts. So if we remember something, we first of all have to notice it. If you tell me your name or your phone number, if I don't pay attention, of course I'm not going to remember. So obviously, if you're drinking and you've had a few drinks, you're not paying a lot of attention. You're already at the get-go not going to remember something. But you might be trying to pay attention, so that's fine. So you have to pay attention. And when you pay attention, you hear it, or you see it, or you smell it. That's the sensory memory. And then you go over from there to the short-term memory. It's encoded. That's fine. So short-term memory, the person in an alcohol blackout, if they paid attention, short-term memory is usually 1 to 5 minutes, something like that. They'll have that. They'll remember 1 to 5 minutes, have a conversation. That's why you can sometimes not know that the person or yourself is in a blackout, because you can carry on a conversation. So it's fine there. But what happens is from short-term memory to long-term memory, something else has to happen. So in normal life, what happens when you have short-term memory and want to put it to long-term memory, you have to not just pay attention, but you have to do something with that memory. So let's say I want to remember your name, or your phone number. So let's say your phone number is 416-323-3660. That's my office number. Now you'll notice that the 323 is in a clump of 3, and the 3660 is in a clump of 4. And often phone companies will make the numbers somewhat melodic or somewhat memorable. So 323, 3660, you can see that there's a kind of play on the doubling of the 2 and the 3s. It helps us remember. So it's a little trick that goes from short-term memory to long-term memory. We call that mnemonics. We call that basically memory tricks that the brain does. And in order for me to remember a person's name, I have to think, okay, what is that? Or the person's phone number, but even a person's name. So if you think about somebody's name that's Mary, how am I going to remember Mary from everybody else? Well, okay, this looks like a Mary that I knew many years ago. So I have to do something with that short-term piece to put it into, to encode it into my long-term memory. So you'll see this diagram here. It goes short-term memory and then moves over to long-term memory. And there is a transfer encoding that occurs that's part of this mnemonic process that I just described. And alcohol interferes with that. Like, it's just too complicated because there's brain impairment happening. I can't even walk a straight line when I'm drinking. So how am I going to make this connection also? So it's essentially you're not connecting dots that are essential in the short-term memory to long-term memory in that hippocampus. So that's the actual mechanism of how an alcohol blackout occurs. So I'm just going to end by saying, well, how can you avoid an alcohol blackout? Because they can be very frightening, especially if you wake up and you don't know how you got to where you got to. I mean, obviously, the first thing would be don't drink that much. I mean, it's a function of how much you drank and how quickly you drank. So then there's often suggestions that you pace yourself, you drink slowly, maybe having water in between each drink, eating, don't just drink, but eat, so that actually the digestion will impair the absorption of the alcohol. Another one that would be really important is don't mix your alcohol with a drug, especially a drug like a sedative, like a benzodiazepine, which is just going to make things much worse. Definitely don't be mixing. Finally, know your tolerance, because like I said, some people get blackouts more quickly than others. I mean, overall, I would say, because I'm an addictions physician and I'm always aware that blackouts are a sign of heavy drinking, I would say maybe you should ask for help, because this is an indication that your drinking is causing problems, and they can be serious problems. So if you are going to drink, take care that you don't get into a blackout, and see it as a flag. This is actually one of those signs that tell me that maybe my drinking requires some help. Thank you. I hope you found this useful.